and welcome to the autumn series of Cyberglass Ceiling. My name's Charles James. In this series, we'll be speaking to people around diversity, neurodiversity, as well as the challenges that leaders have in cybersecurity. Thank you for listening and enjoy. So, Cheryl, really good to meet you. And we're going to kick off with a couple of questions. So we're going to get into it. And about your background, can you share a bit about your background and, what led you to your current role as a DEI communications specialist?
Yeah, so Charles, my background is super varied. I'm actually a qualified optician to begin with. And I went into optics at a young age because when I was in school, my careers advisor told me that journalism wasn't for somebody like me.
Wow.
And at the time, I didn't actually, being young and naive, I didn't actually know what they meant by that. I just thought, I'm sure I'm good at English. I love writing stories. So what does that mean? But anyway, let me go and train to be an optician. So I did that. And 5 years later, I thought, you know what? Sod them. I'm going to retrain to be a journalist. So it wasn't actually until I went into journalism that I realised what they meant.
Yeah.
That, when I was looking around my university peers, and they were all from a certain group funded by the bank of mum and dad, whereas I was still working as an optician to keep myself going. They all looked the same, all had these strange names that...
What, the Tarquins?
Tarquins and the Poppies and the Chelseas and all this. And I was like, okay. And then when I looked into the industry to see who was there were very few black journalists at the time.
It's really weird because I remember being at school and, so long ago I was at school, I think we had one computer. And even though I was interested in it, I was told, not for people like you, James, they used to say. I goes, well, it's a computer. And it's like you were ushered away.
Yeah.
And again, I feel your pain even back then. So do carry on.
I mean, even when I decided to retrain, everybody around me was like, oh, you're being really stupid. You should stay as an optician, blah, blah, blah. You're never going to get... And I was like, no, why are there limitations on what I can do? This is what I want to do and I'm going to go off and do it. So I retrained and I luckily landed my first role at Bloomberg.
Oh, nice.
And so I was focused on financial journalism for a while and then moved on to Bloomberg Money magazine, some various other investment magazines. Then I moved to the Mirror Group, did some editorial stuff there, was the editor of the Birmingham Post at one point. And then I went into corporate communications and landed at GSK, and I spent a long time in corporate comms. In the HR function, primarily dealing with HR comms, the magazine that they had, which was called UK Pharma, that was purely me. Anything to do with people, and getting the message across about how we can better serve our people, the needs of people within the business, and also talking about the new innovations that GSK were doing at the time. That's what I was leading on. Yeah. And I did that for about 13 years.
Oh, wow. It's funny because when the guests that I have on this show, because they're, high ranking in the IT industry working for banks, they have to go through the comms people to say, oh, let's see if I can do this. I'm still trying to convince one or two that it's not about the bank per se, it's about you, and now you represent the bank, but also it's about, how you got to where you got to. So no, fully aware of that and fully aware that you comms people can either say yay or nay.
And you know what? It's funny you said that because when I first started in GSK, because I'd come from newspaper world, magazine world, and we just told it as it is, I was responsible for breaking so many stories. And then to go into the corporate world where you had to be very careful of what you said, I had a huge battle for about 6 months. I used to go home crying every night thinking, I'm rubbish, I don't know what I'm doing, why can't I say this? This is what's going on. And I quickly learned that there's a language, there's a way you speak when you're in corporate land.
Corporate politics.
Corporate politics. You don't give away the
corporate BS.
Yeah, polite way to put it. You don't actually give away what's actually going on, because if you did that, most organisations would be in a lot of trouble. So then I went into banking, back to banking. So I worked at HSBC as a corporate comms advisor, specialist and strategy person. And then someone approached me who I'd worked with way back when on my first role in media to launch Diversity Q.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, the company that was doing it were working with the Women in Finance Charter to develop the charter, and then they put on the Women in Finance Awards to support it, and then they wanted a publication to support that. So I joined, and then within 5 months thought, why are we just talking about women? You know, when it comes to diversity in the workplace, it affects so many people in so many different ways. Let's just talk more broadly about DEI, not just about the impact that women,
No, indeed.
the
And
impact on women.
I was having the conversation again for the last few episodes. Back even my last episode in banking, you don't have the same people that bank. You have a diverse range of people, women, people of colour, again LGBTQ, all different. So how do you communicate to them if you've got the same type of people in your organisation?
Yeah, exactly. How do you build the products for the world if it's just one type of person building them? So I developed out DQ to become the leading publication in the space across the UK and US and to some extent India, which I never actually worked out how that worked, but we had a huge following in India. And then this summer, I've decided that I've done that for 5 years. There's only so much I can do in building it out to the way I want to build it and then doing more. And I'm going to be completely honest, the organisation I was in didn't really want to do the more that I wanted to do. So I decided to launch my own communications company specialising in DEI, because what I realised over the years, the 5-6 years of doing this work, is that why a lot of DEI initiatives fail is because of poor communication on the entire journey, the life cycle. Why, when you try to convince your stakeholders, your business, your employees that this is the right thing to do, it's how you communicate that can either make or break whether it's a success. And I've realised that a lot of organisations struggle with that.
So that brings me on to the next question about the key challenges when you face promoting diversity within organisations today. How do you sort of combat that?
Well, let me tell you about the key challenges to begin with. There's a lot of DEI fatigue out there at the moment. Organisations are saying, we've done a lot of work in this space, but nothing's really changed. And, we're bored of the rhetoric, we're bored of the language, we're pumping money into it, but we're not seeing anything come back, so to speak, because it's harder to measure. Then you have the other thinking where we keep talking about how we're going to promote women, and then the other group are thinking, well, what about us? It's not just about women all the time. You have organisations that say, where is the commercial value in what I'm doing? And if there is commercial value, I'm not seeing it, because, again, going back to the point that it is quite difficult. It can be quite difficult to measure, but there are various ways that you can measure that. Then you have organisations that don't fully understand what they can or can't do because of the legal framework that supports DEI, and it's changing quite often, and new bodies are coming in and saying, we want you to this happen, or you can't do that, etc. So there is that confusion about what you can and can't do. So a lot of companies don't do anything.
No, understand.
Yeah.
Don't do anything in case of offence or...
In case of being challenged, in case of being, well, especially if you're in the US, in case of being sued against discrimination against one group, even though you're trying to support another group. Yeah, so they don't do anything. So, it's easier not to do anything.
Again, and you've spoken in the US as well, haven't you?
I've spoken in the US, yeah.
And I've spent some time in America. I was luckily I was in Chicago, where, I was blinded by the largeness of America. And I'm going back to late 1999, early 2000s. And I thought it was awesome. But, sometimes I chose to see what I did see and chose to ignore what, was blatantly obvious. Because at that time it was like getting on the ladder and shadowing guys that are making $1 million a year selling software. And I'm like, I want to be one of them. I don't care what, you don't see it. But of course, I remember being at an event somewhere in Chicago, And the company I was working for, okay, flew in all the sales guys from all across the US and Europe and the world. And I was speaking to some guy from the South, and he genuinely didn't know there were black people in England.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
He had no idea that there were. And I looked at him and I said, where have you been? In the South
In the
somewhere.
South.
You know what I mean? So no, I do get it, and it still amazes me today. That's another whole conversation
Yeah.
about
And
America.
the
But
challenge is, if you're an international company as well, even if you are operating in the US, different states in the US operate differently. So that, the whole DEI agenda is a minefield. So, and then you have to then do what you do in the UK. And if you operate in Asia, again, it's completely different how you talk to people and address people. So it can be quite challenging for organisations to get their head around what they can and can't do, when and how. So the easiest thing is to do nothing.
indeed. Can you provide examples of specific initiatives and programs that you've implemented to promote diversity and inclusion, and what's been the outcome?
Okay. Oh, God. So I've written DEI inclusive leadership training modules. The reason being, I've noticed that because of this apathy and the not understanding the commercial value of DEI, I needed to educate a certain group of people within the organisation as to why it was important and why it's important to have a DEI strategy that marries your business strategy. There's no point doing them separately. They have to work hand in hand. And if you do that, you can actually see the outcomes that the commercial returns that you're trying to achieve. It's easier to measure. It's easier also to realize that if you don't engage your employees or treat your employees right, even if you brought them in as a diverse person, if they don't stay within the company, that's cost you a lot of money off the bat, recruiting them, bringing them through for a certain time, and then watching them leave is really expensive.
Indeed.
And you don't want to do that. So I wrote an inclusive leadership training module. And to be fair, I did have some resistance to why we need to do this. Why do we need to sit on this program for, 4 hours out of my life to,
I've been doing that for years.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? What do you mean I need to take another exam in technical
exactly.
this or technical that?
And it was just like,
making my brain bleed.
Seriously, people. And then it was just, after they did it, it was just like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it now. I'm going to be completely honest and say, how long did that awareness last, or enthusiasm, or to do better, to do right last? It lasted for as much as I kept bouncing on their door, for about 6 months. And then it was,
Okay.
back to how I used to behave before.
And do you know what? We're going to take a break in a second, but no, I do get it, and I do understand it, and I'm like, where do we need to get to? In my head, I'm going to come up with another couple of questions, but let's take a break, and we'll be back after these words.
This episode was brought to you by Salt Cybersecurity, part of Salt Group, who specialise in providing trust across digital channels by helping major financial institutions verify the identity of their users and authenticating high-value transactions in the UK and globally.
And welcome back. And with me, I've got Cheryl Cole, former editor of Diversity Q and Diversity and Equitable Inclusion Specialist. No, not that Cheryl Cole, this Cheryl Cole, the original Cheryl Cole. But we'll get on with it. So, more questions. As a leader in the workplace, would you say you've seen a shift in culture, promoting people of colour, women, setting those diversity goals? What have you seen? Speak to me.
What have I seen? I've seen change. I'm not going to lie. There has been change over the last few years, especially after the murder of George Floyd. There was a lot of attempts to promote people of colour into more prominent visual positions. And, we also have, I think, the Parker Review, which is trying to get one member of a diverse population on a board by 2021, and that happened. But then we realised that they were still non-execs; they weren't, proper execs, etc. And there's still more work to do in the 250s and 350s.
Yeah, I'm not the Parker Review. Can you?
Yeah, so
elaborate
it was a review that looked into how diverse boardrooms were. And I think it first launched in, quote me, 2019. And what they promised was to try and make at least the FTSE 100 or all boardrooms have at least one member from a diverse population on their board by 2021.
How's that going?
Yeah. So at present, we have, well, don't quote me again because I'm going back to March figures. We have no CEOs of colour on any FTSE board. I'm not sure that we have anybody of colour on a FTSE 100 board CEO anymore. We have some non-executive people, and we have mostly non-exec. If they are of colour, they're mostly non-executive men rather than women. So women are still doing quite poorly in terms of representation. So that was what the review was trying to do, improve diversity on boards. So I'm struggling still to realise why, given that there's so many brilliant people of colour in senior positions around organisations, why it's still so hard to make that leap into a boardroom. And I've noticed that, and I've come to the conclusion that a lot of the reason why it's so hard is because a lot of people are, and forgive me, but I'm going to be honest and say they're there as a visual representation.
So in my language, I'm going to say token.
Thank you. And the support behind them is still not really there. It's not as meaningful as it should be. And you can get so far, but there's only so far you can still get.
And so I can hear the argument coming the other way is that no, we hire on ability, and they don't see, it doesn't matter what they look like or who they are, what sex they are or gender they are, or it's about their ability. And that'd be the argument coming back that no, we hire people on ability only.
In reality, it doesn't happen, because in reality, I'm going to give you an example. We know for a fact that most people of colour who are professionals are overqualified for most roles. They're overeducated, overqualified with experience, and still they can't get a foot through the door. Recruitment agencies will come back to you and say, well, we don't know where to find them. We don't know where, there aren't enough of them out there. We don't have access to these people. So what do? They go and hire what's easiest to hire, the majority, that what they know and what they're most comfortable, and the majority applying for the roles who are going to be not people of colour. So it's a myth to say that people hire on merit, because if they did, I think we'd see a huge shift in people getting roles from underrepresented groups, because, as I said, we're overqualified.
So what advice would you give organisations or individuals looking to improve their diversity and inclusion practices?
First of all, I think you really need to understand your business, because I don't want to say that all organisations need to look to improve their DEI metrics, because it may not be relative to their organisation. And what I mean by that is, if I'm a small farmer, for example, in the middle of the Cotswolds, for example, and I've got 3 or 4 employees, and you're going to turn around and say to me, I have to make one of those. Like that. It makes no sense.
No, because I ain't working out in no column.
Exactly. Or, the demographics around you, or whatever it is, it makes no sense to force organisations to change if it's not necessary. What we're saying is that if a person wants to join your organisation, make it a possibility. Be fair, be open, be transparent, be willing to look at difference to make your organisation fairer for anybody who wants to be a part of it. That's what we're saying when we're talking about why organisations should need to improve their DEI. And also, for example, another argument that I hear is that we need more black people, so we're going to employ more black people. Actually, if you actually look further down your organisation, you probably find that you've got quite a lot of black people in your organisation. So you don't need to employ more. What you need to do is support the ones you have in your organisation to grow and develop equally to the others who don't have to work so hard to get to the top.
Indeed. Now, it's funny you say that because, again, through all the episodes and interviews that I've done with would-be women, people of colour, black, Asian, female, do matter. I'm yet to get some LGBTQ representation, which I'll be looking for over the next few weeks. But what I've seen and the conversations we've had is that these individuals that they're at the top of their game, whether they be heads of, CIOs, CEOs, CISOs, whatever it may be, it's their drive that's got them there.
Yeah.
It's their mentality and drive that's made them stand out, if that makes sense. And so, whether it's, the people that I've spoken to, what I've noticed is that it's not a massive barrier for them because they've gone on and been driven and this is what they've wanted to do. And I've seen this all along the way. But I also am fully aware that their stories also mirror a lot of other stories where people haven't been so driven, people haven't had the opportunity, and sometimes they just go, do you know what, this is it, this is who I am, this is what I'm going to do, because they know that they can't break through that ceiling and break through that barrier.
Can I ask a question? I don't know if you've noticed this, Charles, but is it about also, which is something I've noticed, it's about your cultural background as well. So I've noticed there's a very big difference between people of colour who were born in the UK and people of colour who have come from Africa or the Caribbean.
Question. And let me see if I can get that answer. And we'll work through it together. When you are from the West Indies, when we're from the West Indies, my parents are from the West Indies. My parents are from St. Kitts and Nevis. Yours are from Jamaica?
Yeah, my mum's from Jamaica and my dad's from Nigeria, so I'm half and half.
Ah, see. Now, in the West Indies, my parents grew up having the same schooling as people over here. Whether it be history, geography, maths, English, it was the same. And when my parents came over here, it was hard. It was tough. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and even then it was hard and tough because, quick story, I was born and raised in Luton, or Luton, depending where you're from. And where I lived was behind what was it? What would you call it? A bunch of warehouses, factory. So it was a trading estate. And I remember one time my mum sent me to the shops. I was about 6-7 years old to go and get something for her. And there was a guy on a bike, and he'd come through the alleyway to come down to the main road to the shops. And he spat at me and says, "Go home." And I'm like, "Is he talking to me?" Sort of thing. And I went home and told my mum what had happened. Some guy spat at me on a bike, for goodness sake. And he told me, go back home to where I came from. And I was like, oh. And, my mum sat me down and says, "Look, we are different. We're not the same." At 7, 8 years old, you don't see colour. You just see your mates and, you go to school and, you're having fun. And she spoke to me and she said, "Look, we are different." And it was hard growing up. When we look at our African brothers and sisters, it was slightly different because the path was already cleared for these guys to come over, in my opinion. They didn't have such a hostile atmosphere as our parents did, or my parents did, in the 50s and 60s. And so I guess it was slightly easier for them.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I agree. I agree in that most people that I've met who are not born here and grew up and worked for a period of time elsewhere didn't have the same negative restrictions put upon them. Because everybody looked like them, everyone behaved like them, and all they knew was they were driven, they could achieve. No one was going to tell them you can't achieve anything. Whereas when you're here, growing up here, especially in the 70s and 80s, you're constantly told you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. So when you move off into the workplace, you're already thinking, I can't attain this, I can't achieve that, etc., etc. And you put self-limiting barriers on yourself, I think, to a degree. And it's hard for you to move through that unless you are of a certain nature.
Well, exactly. And, you just saying that, I remember I went to an all-boys school in Chorney, and I always joke about it used to be, it's a bit like, it was like Borstal. It was hard, and the teachers didn't give a toss about you, to be fair. And by the time, I was in my last year at school, it was like, this is a complete waste of my time, because as we spoke about earlier, absolute negativity. No, that's not for you. I remember one guy, and I'll name him, Mr. Williams, Paul Williams. He turned around and said to me, was it him? I think he might have been. Allegedly, anyway. Charles, you're no good at X. All you're good for is, you're a jungle bunny. All you're good is for running and jumping, because I was very good at athletics and winning stuff for the school. And I just looked at him and went, yeah, I've got your number, type thing. I won't tell you exactly what happened, but it was like, I got your number. When you're compared to a jungle bunny and all you're good for running and jumping, you're right. That could stay with you for the rest of your life and thinking, I'm no good. It's not going to happen to me.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
And if you take all the experiences that you have as a child, teenager, and those of your peers growing up with you into the workplace, you're already on the back foot. And I feel that what I've seen is a lot of the high achievers weren't educated in the UK from a young age. And I admire them. I admire their strength, and I admire the fact that they don't give a toss.
Well, welcome to my...
Don't tell me I can't do this, because I'm going to go and do it and achieve it, whether you like it or not.
And that is my mentality, and that has always been my go-to. You know what? I don't care if you're the blooming King of Sheba. Yeah, you're a human being. Yeah, we can achieve the same.
Yeah.
I work with a really nice guy called Rushy, Joss, and this guy, very privileged, went to 2 different universities. We work the same job. Yeah. And I said to him one day, I goes, how's it feel, Rushy? He goes, what are you talking about? He goes, well, you've got to get yourself educated. You've gone, 2 different universities. You didn't really start working until you're 20-something, 7 years old. But yet here we are doing the same job, getting the same pay. Do you know what I mean? And it's that sort of mentality. You just have to be driven.
You have to be.
And, well, we slightly digress, but I love the conversation because, you know what, people need to hear it. And for all those guys at Chorney School, yeah, it don't matter if you're a millionaire, it don't matter if you're a BIM, and it don't matter if you're a blue-collar worker or a white-collar worker. It's not a judgmental thing, but sometimes you've got people who have made a different stuff. And anyone that knows me knows my upbringing. The tragedy of my mum passing away at 14 meant that I had to get my shit together eventually. It didn't happen until I was like 27, but, when it did happen, you're on that focused road. And all I would say is that even at that tender age, even at my tender age now, make sure you've got the right people around you.
Absolutely.
Because if you don't have that support around you, you're going to have that lead weight around your neck.
Absolutely.
And, it's always important to do that.
And it takes me on to the fact that, we talk about, have we seen change in the workplace? Yes, we've seen change. It might not be the absolute change that we want to see, but these people are still standing up as role models for the next generation, to to say that, they've done it, doesn't matter how they did it or why they're there or who put them there for whatever reason, they're actually there. And whether they're rolled out every now and then as a poster child for DEI, it doesn't matter. There's actually a person who's in this position, so you can get there as well. And I think, I didn't have any real role models growing up when I was trying to do journalism. There were very few. But I think my mother was my role model. She was so determined. I think she was one of the first women in the UK to get a mortgage back in the 1960s. And I was like, wow, okay, she was hardcore. So looking at her and thinking, if she can do what she does as a single woman, there's no reason why I can't do what I really want to do, which is one of the reasons I said to everybody, sod that and going back to retrain, because you can't tell me what I can't do.
Absolutely. Getting back on the question thing, we've sort of tilted off kilter, but it's a great conversation to have. In your opinion, what role does leadership play in fostering a diverse and inclusive culture? So, what would you tell the board members or the management or the C-level guys that to be successful? And I'm thinking about banking especially because I tend to get the same sort of answer. Everybody needs a bank account of some sort. So you're going to have a diverse bunch of people. And it's, speaking to, in my last episode, I spoke to a guy called Fox Ahmed. And, especially in the organisation where he works, when he joined 20 odd years ago, it was already diverse. And it's kept on going. And his peers were from a diverse background. And, that gave him heart to continue. And so, again, what would you sort of give that advice?
First of all, if we're going to talk about banking, for example, I'm going to say what leaders need to realise, especially if you're in a large organisation, is that the global majority are actually people of colour. Okay, so if you're going to work in a homogenous group and only produce products based on your homogenous small group that only going to serve at the end of the day 30% of the world's population, then you're missing out commercially on 70% of the world's population, because I can guarantee you the products that you built with your homogenous team who look exactly like you, behave like you, think like you, and expect the same outcomes as you is not going to appeal to everybody else. It's not going to appeal to the person who's in Africa, who is doing all their banking, I don't know, on their little mobile in a certain way because they don't have access to proper bank accounts, etc., etc., etc. If you're not going to produce the products that are going to meet their needs, come 10, 20 years, 10, 15 years, you're going to put yourself out of a business. You may not care because you think you're at the door in 10, 15, 20 years, but what about your children?
Yeah.
What about the legacy that you're leaving them if you're going to ruin the banking system in the UK because you can't be bothered to think differently or engage with people who are different to you? Then you're not leaving anything behind for your children. And that's why I think leaders play a huge role in promoting diversity and inclusion in the workplace. They should be role modeling certain behaviours which is going to support the business growth. Role modeling aspirational behaviours as well that others can learn from, whether you're from the same demographic group or social group or whatever. Role model behaviours that people behind you are going to think, yeah, that's how I want to be, work and treat others in the workplace.
And I think it's starting to happen. Like I said, the conversations I've had over the last God knows how long months, and the guests I've had on the show, those green shoots are starting to happen where there's function, there's groups, especially being promoted within these large corporations, whether it be a NatWest, whether it be a Deutsche Bank, whether it be, Lloyd's, they're starting to promote that, and maybe, promoting it with women in banking, and then, that diversity of women, people of colour in there. So I'd say, yeah, it's on the right track. A lot more to do. I don't think it's going to happen overnight.
I mean, I'm going to be honest and say, putting the FTSE 100 aside, they have their act together in a certain way, and because they've got the resources to have their act together in a certain way. But when you leave that group and you go to the 350, 250 or smaller organisations, it's still very, very challenging when it comes to DEI in the workplace. And I understand completely that they may not have the know-how, the resources, the funds to put behind good DEI initiatives, but it's also the leadership that, to have a good DEI initiative, you don't need a lot of money. You just need willingness and know-how. I'm finding, talking to some of the leadership in that space still, the focus is purely on commercial returns. And if you can't draw that red thread with how your DEI is going to help with that commercial return, they're not interested. I'm going to be blatantly honest, they're not interested. Because it's nice to have, but it's not going to make me money.
Not essential.
It's not essential.
Okay. So we're coming to the end. What's next for Cheryl Cole?
I'm going to continue to help organisations tell the story they need to tell in the right way, not just tick box exercises, not just saying they're doing something for the sake of saying they're doing something, but really help them on this journey of communicating what they need to do, why they need to do it, and how they're going to do it, so that it resonates with all stakeholders within the business, even if they don't recognise somebody as a stakeholder. Because I think, as I said at the beginning, communication is the key to getting people engaged to do what you want them to do and believing in what you're saying you're doing as well. So
Awesome.
That's my journey.
Thank you. Cheryl, it's been an absolute pleasure. We've had a great chat. Thank you for coming on to Cyberglass Ceiling, and I wish you all the best.
And thank you, Charles, for having me.
Thank you very much.
This episode was brought to you by Salt Cybersecurity, part of Salt Group, who specialise in providing trust across digital channels by helping major financial institutions verify the identity of their users and authenticating high-value transactions in the UK and globally.